Do you know the role that Harry S. Truman had in helping to bring about the modern state of Israel? Hi, this is Bill Federer, and in this episode of How We Got Here, we're going to look at the life of President Harry Truman and how his faith played a role in the birth of the modern state of Israel. Harry Truman was born May 8th, 1884. His parents had met at the Blue Ridge Baptist Church, located on the front yard of the Solomon Young Farm, which was next to the Truman Farm. In 1902, at the age of 18, Truman was baptized at Benton Boulevard Baptist Church. In 1916, he became a member of Grandview Baptist Church. A handwritten note in Truman's secretary's files, 1945, stated, "I'm a Baptist because I think that sect gives the common man the shortest and most direct approach to God." In a letter to his future wife, Betsy Wallace, March 19th, 1911, Truman wrote, "I believe in people living what they believe and talking afterwards." His first job was working as a timekeeper for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. In 1905, he then worked clerical jobs in downtown Kansas City. Truman clerked at the Kansas City Star and the National Bank of Commerce. A co-worker of his was Arthur Eisenhower, the brother of future President Dwight Eisenhower. Truman also met a clothing store clerk named Eddie Jacobson, the son of poor Jewish immigrants from Lithuania, with whom he later went into business with. At the age of 22, Truman returned to his family's Grandview farm. At the age of 27, he proposed to Beth Wallace, but she turned him down. After courting her 8 years, she finally agreed, and they were married at Trinity Episcopal Church in Independence, Missouri, June 28, 1919. Truman enlisted in the Missouri National Guard. He was almost rejected due to poor eyesight, 20/50 in his right eye and 2400 in his left eye. He only got in because he had memorized the eye chart. When the U.S. entered World War I, over 1 million soldiers were sent to Europe. Truman was made captain of a field artillery battery in France. During a night attack by the Germans in the Vosges Mountains, his soldiers began to flee, but he rallied them to stay and fight. In the Meuse-Argonne offensive, September 27, 1918, Truman saw through his binoculars an enemy artillery battery preparing to fire on a nearby American division. He ordered his men to open fire, saving the division. He later provided support for George S. Patton's tank brigade. Not one man was lost out of Truman's battery. A soldier serving in Truman's battalion was his Jewish friend, Eddie Jacobson. In addition to their other Army responsibilities, Truman and Jacobson ran their unit's canteen. After the war, Truman and Jacobson opened a haberdashery, a men's clothing store in downtown Kansas City. Well liked by his customers, Truman ran for office and was elected a Jackson County official in 1922. After serving as a county judge, he ran as a candidate for the U.S. Senate in 1934. He won thanks to the Kansas City political machine of Tom Prendergast, whose nephew served with Truman in the military. In 1943, Senator Truman sponsored a bill to designate the birthplace of the Black scientist George Washington Carver as a national monument. It was the first national monument dedicated to an African American. In his memoirs, Volume 2, Years of Trial and Hope, 1956, Truman wrote of supporting Israel. "When I was in the Senate, I had told my colleagues, Senator Wagner of New York and Senator Taft of Ohio, that I would go along on a resolution putting the Senate on record in favor of the speedy achievement of the Jewish homeland." Senator Harry Truman was chosen to be vice president to Franklin D. Roosevelt. On February 14th, 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, in poor health, met with King Abdul Aziz ibn Saud on the USS Quincy in the Suez Canal on his way back from the Yalta Conference. They arranged a secret agreement where Saudi Arabia would supply oil to the U.S. in exchange for the U.S. providing military defense for Saudi Arabia. Once back in America, Roosevelt wrote to the Saudi king, April 5th, 1945, promising that as long as he was president, the U.S. would not recognize a Jewish state. I communicated to you the attitude of the American government towards Palestine, that no decision will be taken. I assured you that I would take no action in my capacity as chief of the executive with regard to the question of Palestine. The policy of this government is unchanged. Within a week of writing that letter, the ailing Roosevelt died. Harry S. Truman then became the 33rd president. In his first address to Congress, April 16, 1945, Truman quoted an Old Testament scripture, 1 Kings 3:9. As I have assumed my heavy duties, I humbly pray Almighty God in the words of King Solomon. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? I ask only to be a good and faithful servant of my Lord and my people. Some important background information. After World War I, the map of Europe was redrawn, dividing up land that had previously been under German control. Germany's ally had been the Turkish Ottoman Empire. After the war, it ceased to exist, and the map of the Middle East was also redrawn. France controlled the former Ottoman land out of which the country of Syria was formed. Britain controlled land out of which it created a land for Arabs called Iraq. Since the Arab Sharif of Mecca had helped the British defeat the Ottoman Turks, Britain took the son of the Sharif, Faisal, and made him king of Iraq. Britain controlled land called the British Mandate, which it had given to the Jews in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. Its borders matched the borders God had originally promised Moses over 3,000 years earlier. Due to the unauthorized promises of British Lieutenant Lawrence of Arabia, the Sharif of Mecca was led to believe that Arabs would get all the land in the Middle East. When Arabs threatened to start another war, Britain took 2/3 of the land it had given the Jews and created another Arab country in 1921 called Jordan, and made Faisal's brother Abdullah king of Jordan. In 1922, Britain limited Jewish immigration to the Holy Land with the British White Papers. In 1924, Britain let Arabia's modernist Sharif of Mecca be ousted by the Saudi. This had serious consequences as the Saud family adhered to violent Wahhabism. Wahhabis were described by Lawrence of Arabia in his book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, 1922. The Wahhabis, followers of a fanatical Muslim heresy, had imposed their strict rules. Everything was forcibly pious and forcibly puritanical. Brookings Institute scholar William McCantis wrote, Saudis promote a very toxic form of Islam that draws sharp lines between a small number of true believers and everyone else, Muslim and non-Muslim. In 1928, followers of Wahhabi teaching founded the Muslim Brotherhood and plotted assassinations of Arab leaders who were too friendly with Western countries. In 1939, Britain issued more white papers limiting Jewish immigration to the Holy Land. World War II started in 1939. During the course of that war, Hitler killed millions of Jews. Hitler had been allied with the Mufti of Jerusalem, who hated Jews and held to the views of the Muslim Brotherhood. After World War II, thousands of persecuted and displaced Jews fled Europe to settle in their ancient homeland. Truman was instrumental in founding the United Nations, June 26, 1945. Frustrated with Arab-Israeli tensions, Britain announced it would surrender its British mandate to the newly formed United Nations. British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin declared, England is going to leave on May 15, 1948. We give the problem to the United Nations. The UN solution was to partition the land into an Arab state and a Jewish state, which Israeli leader Ben-Gurion accepted, but Arabs refused, leaving it up to the UN General Assembly to decide. It looked as though the United States would not favor the plan, and it would be voted down, allowing Arabs to seize all the land. Israeli leader Chaim Weizmann traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Truman, but Truman was too busy and declined. Then Eddie Jacobson, Truman's longtime Jewish friend, placed a call. Mr. President, Harry, you've got to do me this one favor. See this tired old man? He's come halfway across the world to see you. Just give him a few minutes of your time. Truman agreed to meet. Weizmann told him, you have the opportunity of the ages. If you'll stand strong now, you'll go down in history for all eternity. Truman was impressed with Weizmann and agreed to support the new state of Israel. The news of this decision was immediately sent to the U.S. Ambassador Warren Austin at the United Nations. The timing of the message providentially interrupted Austin's speech, where he was about to announce the U.S. was not going to support Israel. After talking with Truman on the phone, Warren returned to his audience and said, President Truman has instructed me that the United States supports in full the partition plan as adopted by the United Nations and will work to see it implemented. On midnight, May 14th, 1948, the modern state of Israel came into being. It was immediately recognized the next day, May 15th, 1948, by the United Nations, led by the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Truman shared his views on the Middle East at a press conference, New York Times, August 17th, 1945. The American view on Palestine is that we want to let as many of the Jews into Palestine as it is possible. He wrote to Winston Churchill, July 24th, 1945. The drastic restrictions imposed on the Jewish immigration by the British White Paper of May 1939 continue to provoke passionate protest from Americans most interested in Palestine and in the Jewish problem. They fervently urge the lifting of these restrictions, which deny to Jews who have been so cruelly uprooted by ruthless Nazi persecutions entrance into the land which represents for so many of them their only hope of survival. Truman referred to rebuilding their land April 3rd, 1951. There is a lesson for us in the passage from the Bible. The book of Ezra describes the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem after the long captivity in Babylon. The writer describes the people shouting with a great shout when the foundation of the new temple was laid. Some of those in the crowd, particularly the old men, did not shout, they wept. Truman continued, these were the men who remembered all the sacrifices, all the sufferings of all the people that their people had undergone during the captivity. They knew that these sacrifices had not been made in vain. They realized that in spite of all their troubles and in the face of overwhelming odds, their faith had prevailed. And so they were too deeply moved to shout. They wept for joy. They gave thanks to God because he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. In his desire for groups in the Middle East to get along, Truman had given a note to his assistant, as recorded in his memoirs, Volume 2, Years of Trial and Hope, 1956. I surely wish God would give the children of Israel and Isaiah, the Christians of St. Paul, and the sons of Ishmael a peep at the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is a reference to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:12. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Referring to how ancient Israel influenced the founding of America, Truman told the Attorney General's Conference, February 15th, 1950, the fundamental basis of this nation's laws was given to Moses on the Mount. The fundamental basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we get from Exodus and St. Matthew, Isaiah, and St. Paul. I don't think we emphasize that enough these days. If we don't have a proper fundamental moral background, we will finally end up with a totalitarian government which does not believe in rights for anybody except the state. The day after the United Nations recognized the new state of Israel, it was immediately attacked by Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, the Arab Legion, and the Transjordanian Army. Against all odds, Israel survived. The chief negotiator in arranging an armistice between Israel and her enemies was Ralph Bunche. Bunche set up a meeting in 1947 between two members of the UN Special Committee on Palestine and Menachem Begin, the leader of the Irgun Jewish underground, who would later be Israel's prime minister. The British negotiator, Richard Crossman of Britain, asked Bunch if his exposure to Jews had made him anti-Semitic yet. Ralph Bunche answered, "That would be impossible. I know the flavor of racial prejudice and racial persecution. A wise Negro can never be an anti-Semite." As he was leaving Bacon's hideout, Ralph Bunche told Bacon, "I can understand you. I am also a member of a persecuted minority." Bunche was the first African American to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump offered Bunche numerous high-level foreign policy positions, but Bunche respectively declined. A beach in Fort Myers, Florida, is named for Ralph Bunche. Democrat President Harry Truman sent a telegram to President of Israel, Dr. Chaim Weizmann, in Tel Aviv, October 2nd, 1948. "On this, your first New Year's Eve as President of the Provisional Council of the State of Israel, I send you warm personal greetings and congratulations. May the new year bring peace to Israel and to its citizens the opportunity to dedicate themselves in tranquility to furthering the prosperity of their country." On November 29th, 1948, President Truman wrote to Dr. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, "I want to tell you how happy and impressed I have been at the remarkable progress made by the new state of Israel." Truman added, "I remember well our conversations about the Negev, and I deplore any attempt to take it away from Israel. I had thought that my position would have been clear to all the world, particularly in light of the specific wording of the Democratic Party platform." The 1948 Democrat Party platform stated, "President Truman, by granting immediate recognition to Israel, led the world in extending friendship and welcome to a people who have long sought and justly deserved freedom and independence. We pledge full recognition to the state of Israel. We affirm our pride that the United States, under the leadership of President Truman, played a leading role in the adoption of the resolution, November 29th, 1947, by the United Nations General Assembly for the creation of a Jewish state. We approve the claims of the State of Israel to the boundaries set forth in the United Nations resolution of November 29th and consider that modifications thereof should be made only if fully acceptable to the State of Israel." The Democratic Party platform continued, "We look forward to the admission of the State of Israel to the United Nations and its full participation in the international community of nations. We pledge appropriate aid to the State of Israel in developing its economy and resources. We favor the revision of the arms embargo to accord to the State of Israel the right of self-defense." Truman continued his letter to Israel's President, Dr. Chaim Weizmann, November 29, 1948. "I have interpreted my reelection as a mandate from the American people to carry out the Democratic platform, including the plank, of course, on Israel." Well, I hope you have found this episode of How We Got Here on the founding of the modern state of Israel interesting. God bless you.